If you'd like to read along, visit shahnamehquest.substack.com for transcripts, illustrations, and bonus content. The Shahnameh begins with Ferdowsi's Invocation. It opens with the famous lines in Persian, Bename Khodavand Jan o Khirad, which means, in the name of God Almighty, creator of the mind and of wisdom. This sets everything in motion, and what follows is a long dedication divided into sections. First, Ferdowsi writes an effusive praise to God as the creator and giver of all good things on earth. Ferdowsi spends many verses delving into God as the master of the universe and the ruler of the sun and the planets, and goes further to say that everything wise or good in the world exists as attributes to God. That all the good things humans cherish in the world, virtue, love, wisdom, knowledge, and grace, that these can only be understood as God's gift to the earth and its people. Next, Ferdowsi invokes the Prophet Muhammad, praising him as the guide and teacher of the faith, who embodies the virtues of God into his teachings. He then invokes Ali, and says that if Muhammad is the sun, then Ali is the moon. So the two of them become the second major focus of praise in his invocation. Ferdowsi, being a Muslim himself, see them as the essential guides and stabilizers of the faith. Then Ferdowsi recounts the history of how the Shahnameh project originally began and at what point he joined it. What many don't know is that Ferdowsi wasn't the originator of the Shahnameh. That was actually another poet named Daqiqi, who was a contemporary and friend of Ferdowsi's. He started it. Ferdowsi honors Daqiqi as an extraordinary poet who had great promise and ambition, but he unfortunately met with an untimely death at the hands of one of his servants. Daqiqi was killed after writing about 1,000 verses of his Shahnameh. He died around 977 AD. Ferdowsi's sympathy for Daqiqi's ambitious project compelled him to pick up the mantle and complete the Shahnameh. So, this section also acts as giving Daqiqi the credit he deserves posthumously as the initiator of this epic. So in the invocation, we begin with the cosmic and divine praises, and then Ferdowsi transitions into praises of humans and people that he actually knew. Finally, Ferdowsi describes the patronage behind the Shahnameh and how he came to be entrusted with writing it. And here he recounts meeting a man named Abu Mansur, who was a wealthy nobleman who gave his approval and patronage to make Ferdowsi write it. And in doing so, Abu Mansur gave Ferdowsi advice that if he's going to write the Shahnameh, he's best served to dedicate it to the reigning king at the time. This was in the late 900s, which means that Iran had been under the rule of the Ghaznavid Empire. When Ferdowsi finished the epic, it was around the year 1010 AD, and the ruler of the Ghaznavid Empire at the time was Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna. So, the short answer to the question of who was the king that Ferdowsi wrote much of the Shahnameh under, it was Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna. So this section of the invocation is dedicated entirely to Sultan Mahmud. And Ferdowsi goes out of his way to heap enormous praise on the king, including a long dream sequence where he describes being lost in the wilderness and found the king's grace and the noble creatures who honored him with the opportunity to put into words the true nobility of kingship. Now, ironically, as history will eventually show, Ferdowsi's relationship with Sultan Mahmud becomes tense and complicated, but we'll get to that later. With his praise of the king, Ferdowsi concludes his long invocation and dedication, from the cosmic to the divine, to the historical, to the present moment. So all of this sets the stage for the rest of the Shahnameh. Now before we dive into the stories of the epic itself, it's important to note the structural and stylistic devices that Ferdowsi uses. Structurally, the Shahnameh is divided into 3 sections, also called 3 ages. First is the mythical age, then the heroic age, and then the historical age. In the stories from the mythical and heroic ages, time and space are much more abstract and ethereal, and sometimes dynasties and lifespans are measured in centuries and even millennia. But as the epic continues to evolve and unfold and texturize, especially getting into the historical age, which is archives of real kings that existed, time and space become much more defined and human scale. Stylistically, it's crucial to note that every couplet in the Shahnameh, more than 50,000 of them, are told with rhyme, rhythm, and precision. That's why it's such an incredible achievement. Everything you've already heard me talk about, the invocation, and everything that's about to follow in the stories themselves, is told in dozens, hundreds, and thousands of passages, always in perfect rhyme. These rhyming couplets are a trademark of Persian poetry, so if you ever get the chance to hear the Shahnameh or any Persian poem read aloud, listen carefully for the rhymes because they are central and essential. And that leads me to the final point I'd like to make in this episode, which is the crux of the Shahnameh's purpose. At the time when Ferdowsi was writing the Shahnameh, the Persian language and culture were severely diminishing. So Ferdowsi, who cared so deeply about the preservation of the Persian language, used the Shahnameh as a way to resurrect and eternalize it for future generations. So the Shahnameh endures in the psyche of the Persian people today, not just as a source of myths and stories, but as a symbol for the majesty of Persian culture and language itself. So with all of that said, let's now dive into the actual stories of the Shahnameh, beginning with the birth of the first humans on Earth, under the court of the world's first king, Kumars. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it or leave a review. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more Shahnameh quests.